This is the flag of the Netherlands, and if you're a regular viewer of the channel, that means you know what's going to happen next. Hold on a minute, you said this was the flag of the Netherlands, but that flag clearly has an orange stripe, not a red stripe. So which flag is that? Well, in this video we're going to find out why the orange colour changed to a red colour on the Dutch flag. Quick disclaimer before I get started is that I have actually already made a video about this, but it was 2 years ago and when my laptop was broken, so there's nothing to look at in the video, it's just a 20-minute ramble. There's some interesting stuff in there, but it's a bit disorganised, so I thought I'd do it properly and with some nice visuals, but there will be a link to that in the description. Even before the Netherlands, the county of Holland was often associated with the colours red, white, blue, usually being shown in 3 bands. This might come from the House of Bavaria, which for the last sort of 70-80 years ruled over the county of Holland before it was absorbed by the Habsburgs. And this was the state of affairs until obviously in the 1560s the Dutch revolted against the Spanish, and this Dutch revolt would later turn into the 80 Years' War. And it's here that the colour orange starts to become very important, obviously because of Willem van Oranje, who is known in Dutch often as Willem de Zwijger or William the Silent. Now the reason he was called of Orange was because of the Principality of Orange. He was part of the House of Orange and Nassau being related more in Germany. But this Principality of Orange was actually in the south of France for a long time. It should be noted, however, that the Principality of Orange etymologically wasn't related to either the fruit or the colour, but that on the livery, the personal arms of Willem de Zwijger, there was a lot of orange, and this might be why they changed the original red, white, blue that was being used or was associated with the county of Holland to orange, white, blue in honour of him, as he was the main figurehead of the revolt against the Spanish. And it's recorded that in 1574, with the breaking of the siege, the Spanish siege of the city of Leiden, that they actually then, the officers were wearing white, orange and blue to distinguish themselves. This seems to have stuck around in flag form, becoming known in French with the 3 colours of the flag as orange, blanc, bleu, and then the Dutchified version becoming oranje, blanc, bleu as well, which is still sometimes used in reference to this flag. The year after the relief of Leiden in 1575, we see the first colour image of a Dutch flag, and this is accompanying a poem written by Jan van Hout called Vriendschap, which is early modern Dutch for vriendschap, which is friendship, which is quite a famous poem and was recently, I think it was recently written on a wall in Leiden. That sounds very informal, but it's on a it's properly done on the wall in Leiden. So if you're at the 3 Oktoberstraat, you can see this poem on the wall, but actually the accompanying illustration is the first picture we have with the colours of the Dutch flag. Clearly though, the red, white, blue version stuck around somehow, because otherwise today we wouldn't have the flag that we do. And today we also have 2 different names for the orange, white, blue and the red, white, blue in Dutch. Now the red, white, blue is known as the Statenvlag, which is the state's flag, whereas the orange, white, blue is known as the Prinsenvlag or prince's flag. And the usage of these two, even in the 17th century, can be divided into 2 different groups. Now, one using the Statenvlag are related more to the Staatsgezinde, which are loosely the Republican Party, and these were supported generally by rather rich people and strongly Protestant people, as well as by those in the merchant fleet, which was, remember, very important for the Dutch economy with all their spicy trading. The Prinsgezinde, so those in favour, also known as the House of Orange, more inaccurately as royalists, were in favour of having a stadhouder, so a more centralised form of government under one of the House of Orange. And that's why they're called Orangists, and these were more likely to be people in the military, so especially in the navy, as well as lower class people, working class people supporting that. So there's a distinction between the two, and obviously it's called the Prinsenvlag because it was the flag of the Prince of Orange. So at some point in the 17th century, the orange of the Prinsenvlag was replaced with the red of the Statenvlag. And I thought something fun might be to have a look at some Dutch paintings, specifically of the magnificent Dutch ships of the Golden Age, and to have a look at which flags are being flown there and the approximate date of the painter, keeping in mind that the painter might be doing this from imagination rather than actually having seen the ships, although very often the level of detail and the experience of the painter does suggest that they were familiar with the ships they were painting. But first, for our video sponsor, Eine Flags.
If you are interested in vexillology, which is the fancy way of saying the study of flags, then you might indeed be interested in Eine Flags, which sells a whole host of flags for really not that much online. And to make matters even better, it's free delivery. They sell a whole host of US flags and national flags, many of which I've actually talked about in videos. So just like the one in this video, you can see that you could buy a beautiful Dutch flag. Of course, every Dutch flag is beautiful in my eyes, but especially so, as well as this one from Abyssinia, which is the old Ethiopian flag, as I talked about in my video about the Rastafarians. My favourite Ainley feature though has to be their custom flags, and essentially you can make your own flag, design your own flag, and then they will make that flag and send it out to you. So a lot of people were saying in a previous video when I had this flag as a fictional design for a Vinland flag, so the Vikings in North America, that Vinland was actually in Canada, so it should be a Canadian flag. But with Ainley flags, you can go ahead and design that, and they won't just whack it on and like print it onto the flag. They actually have experts who go and they add and they measure up the sides and they actually make a decent looking flag from your design rather than just smacking it onto the flag willy-nilly. Heck, just looking through the website, I found another flag that I mentioned in this video, the Bavarian flag, which inspired the colours for the Dutch flag, which is in the more flags section. So if you ever want to have a look and, you know, see some flags that you didn't know were out there, oh, Knights Templar, why not? Then, you know, Deus Vault and buy one, I guess. So if you find your lack of vexillological items flagging, then go over to Ainley Flags and buy a flag today.
This is a nice early one from around 1602, which shows a Dutch ship ramming in half a Spanish galleon. And I believe the painter of this one was Hendrik Cornelis Vroom, and you can see on the top that they're flying the flag of Holland, so with the lion on of the county of Holland, but then also with the tricolour. Now it's quite hard to make out often on these kind of paintings which one it is, but I think it's fair to say that that is a more orangey colour, so a Prinsenvlag. And if we look at another painting, this from 2 years later, if we contrast the red on the stripy flag on the ship on the left there with the colour of the tricolour, then that's quite clearly an orange that's being shown. So this is early period, so we would expect to see Prinsenvlag here in these paintings by Vroom. Now if we move on slightly in time and go to 1639, then it becomes a little harder to tell which one's being flown, and I'm being wrong. What do you want? If memory serves correctly, then this one was done by a painter called Reiner Nooms, who back then was known as the Zeeman, or the seaman in Old English, the mariner. And his paintings, he was actually on board ships for a large part of his life. He was in the Navy, so then when he retired, he started to paint. So it's fair to say that he probably had a very good idea of what flags were being flown, and I'm guessing he would have drawn or painted the right ones. And it's fair to say that this one here is clearly a Statenvlag, that's clearly a red. It's definitely changed from the previous colouring. And if we look at another one of his works here, I believe this is the Battle of Leghorn, or Leghorn in English, which was fought against the English. And again, it's clear that, or well, fairly clear that that's a darker, a red colour. But if we progress further in time, so one that was done in the 1630s, 1640s, I believe this one will have been done by Bonaventura Peters. We see here on the very left, we have the bottom flag that's quite clearly it's faded, but it's a red colour, whereas the tricolour there is clearly a different shade. That's clearly an orange, and especially when you contrast that with the longer sort of wimple-like flag beneath, that's definitely a red, but then it's clearly an orange on top. And this is 1630s, 1640s. But the same painter in a later painting, if we compare the red of the flag at the back of the ship to the top, it seems that that is showing a red colour. So even between painters, it wasn't just one painter would paint one type of flag and another would paint another. It seems there was some variation between them. This next painting, which was done in 1665, and I believe it shows a battle in the Anglo-Dutch Sea War, although which one I am at a loss. Also which painter it is, I can't remember. I think it might be Van der Velde. But then again, if we look, we can see there that the flag, although it potentially is just fading of the painting, looks more like a Prinsenvlag at the top of the mast rather than anything else. It certainly isn't being done with the same colour as the red of the back of the flag on the back. Now if we advance in time again to 1690, this one is, I believe, one of Ludolf Bockhausen's paintings. He was a German-Dutch painter. And then if we look at the colour being used, even at this very late date, it seems to be a Prinsenvlag in this painting, which shows ships in some sort of trouble off Gibraltar. And finally, if we look at this one from 1698, was done by Abraham Storck, who's quite famous. These clearly are Staatenvlag being shown. This is definitely a red colour that's being used on these. So a little bit of the evolution of the flags in these Dutch ship paintings. It's quite hard just at a cursory glance to really draw too many conclusions from it. It seems to be a bit of a mixed bag. Now, I had read somewhere that the merchant navy always used the Staatenvlag, and that the military navy always used the Prinsenvlag, or that they switched at some point around 1660. But I'm not sure if this is the case just from looking at paintings. So now that we've looked at the origins and some of the uses of both of these flags, now let's take a look at why did the red, white, blue version, the Staatenvlag, become the official version as opposed to the orange, white, blue of the Prinsenvlag. Part of the answer might lie in a neighbouring country, in England. I mean, I guess that's the Britain montage rather than the England montage, but then the Civil War, which is the thing that I was going to talk about, was in Scotland as well, which I have videos about, so check them out if you're interested in that kind of thing. But essentially, there was a big civil war that went on in England in the 1640s between the supporters of the king, who at the time was Charles I, and the supporters of Parliament. And this kind of translated over into the Netherlands as well, with the two camps, the Staatsgezinde and the Prinsgezinde, sort of backing the different sides, although that clearly wasn't a civil war in the Netherlands. But after a long fought struggle, the parliamentarians, especially with the leadership of Oliver Cromwell, became successful and were victorious. One theory that I read about said that the colour orange was often associated with the Stuarts, who had recently been deposed in England, so it seemed that fashion was moving away from orange and towards red, especially as the Staatsgezinde in the Netherlands were doing quite well, although I'll mention that in a second. However, I can't actually find any sort of primary or even secondary sources that really back up this claim that the Stuarts were, associated with the colour orange. And actually, in looking at the English Civil War and, with colours, which I did in a special video, I'll put a card up about that, I actually seem to have found the opposite, that orange was more sort of associated with the parliamentarian side than with the royalist side or with the Stuarts in particular. 1650 is a very important year, because in 1650 the Willem van Oranje, the second Willem van Oranje, the stadhouder of the Netherlands, he dies. And instead of his son coming and becoming stadhouder, as you might expect, that wasn't how it worked with the stadhouders. And it seemed that the Staatsgezinde were powerful enough to stop another stadhouder of the entire Dutch Republic being elected. And so we enter the first stadhouderless period in the Dutch Republic from around 1650 to, I believe it's 1673. And there were no stadhouders in the Netherlands of the entire Dutch Republic, and instead power is balanced between various powerful figures like the De Witt brothers as well as their uncles. This internal politics probably explains more about the flag situation than that theory about the Stuarts and the colour orange and not wanting to displease the Republicans in England, because obviously the orange had been the colour of the Orangists, of the stadhouders, and now because the Staatsgezinde were in the ascendance, it makes sense that they would move to assert their flag as the flag. And it seems that in 1652 they did actually ban the use of the Prinsenvlag in the Netherlands and in certain circles, which is really quite interesting. Now, of course, the Staatsgezinde were very pleased that the parliamentarians had won in England, but the Orangists losing power in the Dutch Republic weren't too pleased that the monarch, Charles I, had been beheaded, because obviously this set a precedent for what could happen to potentially stadhouders in the Netherlands as well. So these were dark times for the Prinsgezinde. And so it's possible that if we read between the lines here, we see in 1650, for example, the Marquess of Montrose, as I explained in a previous video, went over and tried to reunite the royalist cause even after the death of Charles I. And as well, we get in 1651 the final defeat of Charles II, or who would be Charles II, at Worcester. So there were definitely attempts by the royalists to wrest power back from the Republicans, and it's possible that the Orangists were helping them in doing this, and that might be why, as a reprisal, that then the Staatsgezinde banned the Prinsenvlag from being used by them.
which we see happening in 1652. And after this, the Prinsenvlag is seen much less commonly in paintings and being mentioned. But alright everyone, so thank you very much for watching. This has been my video on the Dutch flag and why the orange of the Prinsenvlag has been changed to the red of the Statenvlag. Now there is a bit more recent history to do with the Second World War and the NSB party with the various flags there, but I think I'm going to save that for another video and maybe have a discussion video or something like that to open up some ideas of debate on that one. But I wanted to focus more on sort of the core 17th century history behind the two flags and the origin of the two and sort of the interplay between them, as well as looking at some of the paintings, which I thought was quite a nice way to show off some of the art, because it is really nice artwork there. So a big thank you to the painters. Well, yes, a big thank you to the painters, but also to the Patreons for helping me out monetarily so that I can keep making the videos as well as surviving, which is always a good thing. And thank you to everyone else who's watched. It really means a lot that there's still people watching and commenting and sharing my stuff. So thank you very much. Well, I've been History with Hilbert, and I'll see you all again very soon.